Good morning, everyone. My name is Allan Pero. I'm in the English and Writing Studies Department at Western, and it is my great pleasure, indeed honor this morning, to introduce two writers, Penn Kemp. Penn Kemp, of course, was born in Strathroy and, of course, grew up in London, disappeared for 35 years, came back in 2001, of course, has produced dozens of poetry collections and performance collections, and has been a writer in residence at different places, including Western. As past poet laureate of London, and she will be reading several of her latest pieces for us today. And we have Susan Musgrave, who has produced over 20 books of poetry. There, of course, her children's literature, her fiction, her nonfiction. She, as her book Origami Dove, was a finalist for the GG. She's been writer in residence at Western as well as several other places. They're both dazzling poets, and we know this. So I'll shut up, and we'll let them dazzle us some more. Thank you.
I will dazzle at a slightly lower level. First of all, real thanks to Josh and Carolyn and Tom and all the organizing committee of this event, which is, the theme seems to have been all the way through about community. So I've drudged up a poem that was written when I was poet laureate to celebrate community. Allan, your job is to time me.
I shall.
So the whip comes out, not the whip, the cane.
Okay.
I'm a cane woman.
Shepherd's crook.
That's good. You're from Stratford now. Where one art is felt in the heart of another, where one voice is heard in the song of the other, we make magic. Describing the art, friends collect and call, gathering poets in harmony with musicians, designing artists, moving dancers, rhythm rhymes us. Creating community, fusion delights, a spacious collective, call elective, creating community collective. Community-minded in spirit and soul and together, gathered at the full, we are held in the bowl. London is a bowl, in a bowl of community. The graces are present, spirits are high, lift the cup and dance, sing, spin, say, weave, win over, wave, right, welcome. Gathering together to celebrate, we keep continuous in good company. Attendance is high, attention is close. We appreciate how we appreciate one another, different and the same. The arts are vocation, invoking the vocative, provocative, calling us, calling on us, call sure, culture, meeting many cultures collected, weaving together whatever the weather we conjure, compose, one art envisioned, inclusive in terms of the other, art for all our sake. Pause and connect. The art of the heart of the art of the company at the heart of the earth. When we are in good company, when art's in good company, when we start in good company, good art, good in company, merges to enlighten, engage, ensue, and enamor in chorus. Interlaced refrains that don't refrain from complimenting artists who complement each other. A meeting of media creating bouquet, spray, posy, garland, a plate of ribbons in tribute to the source we spring from, tapping to truth. Oh, may the best manifest, best of all festivity, best of all company, sing your heart out, dance your art in, cheer and exult, hail and salute. Here, heart to heart to art to art to art to heart to heart to art again and again. And on another note, Oh, God. I was thinking, because this is so much about writers and readers, that I would read a couple of poems about writers, but I'm going to save that really good one for another time. Oh, God. I'm back to the one that I was going to save for another time. We're on now. Fair play on fur in F sharp. Until the fur market dropped out, Alice Munro's father raised foxes in kennels on a farm, farther from civilization than teenage Alice Laidlaw preferred. Think of the kill. Old horses in the barn, waiting their turn to be fed, to be feed. Foxes to be fed, to be pelted, not petted. In dear life, Alice waters their foxes. She seldom writes about feeding them horse. I read that with such glee, just pure glee. Okay. Regarding what is given, while Clee takes a line for a walk, Cash walks the line, and you type a line already exposed on the blank but measured screen. The line requests reply, inquiring why, plaintive as a choir in plain song, empty as a needle eye, and just as full. When a line stares at you in the face, what is it demanding? Not enough said or too much down in black against white? What lies behind the line that lies so flatly on the page? Planes of undifferentiated disparity in 2 dimensions. Perception shrinks to the length and width of a white sheet, forgetting depth for breadth. Breath squeezed onto even surface. Plain, but not simple. Simple, but not easy. Eased into familiar complexity, the iterative wanders through uninvestigated realms of possibility not yet verbalized. In reams of rhyme and story told, spewing reasons all their own, a patter of cliche recurs at random when the pat lie surfaces all too conveniently, slips into place as if pattern might solve the old puzzle you need to articulate again and again. What springs to mind can be sometimes appropriate, sometimes appropriated. Mind the gap, to grasp indifferent reminders of what might remain reflexive difference, a gift of involuntary enunciation, association demands alert reaction to discern what could be learned, what spurned, and what wants, waits, just is, carried over to the next poem, where why echoes down the row. Give that piece your heart, your best regards ever. I have to go diving for the third book because I'm not sure I can find the page in time, actually, so I may not do that. The third book is what Insomniac Press has just released recently, called Local Heroes, and I guess you'll just have to buy it because I'll tell you about the poem. It's the cover of the book, and it's my sort of heroine because she left London at the age of 20, as I did, and fled all around the world, as I did, and then returned, as I did. But this was she was born in 1839, and the cover is a photograph of her in 1870. I wish I could remember the page to alert you to, but I don't know it. And she's sitting on a camel, looking extremely proud. Allan, at this point, I can do this. I can't find the poem in time, but I can show you the picture, which is of her looking extremely pleased with herself on a camel. And under her 1870 crinoline of the style of the time, she's wearing a Berber's cloak. And she has exactly the same expression. I don't know if you know camels, but they're very arrogant and they like to spit. She has exactly the same expression. So this is my take on colonial, dear Teresa Harris. And the other thing to note is the look on the camel driver. It is a scowl. I have time for one more poem. I'm so sorry I couldn't read that poem to you. Of course, it's the best in the book. Naturalize, the dream spreads into my backyard. It is raining. I have fallen asleep listening to downpours on a greenhouse vinyl roof. I have fallen asleep listening to laments by Natalie Goldberg. Nat, she calls herself, when chiding or coaching or encouraging more writing. The gnats have emerged from hibernation or larvae to buzz about my face, agitated by upcoming storm. Or are these midges? Fungus gnats all winter have harbored among my too well-watered plants, breeding, eating the sweet succulents, and now emerging. Lightning flickers and computer growls, but it will go on back up if struck, I hope. Thunder roars back, shaking our window frame, but still far distant. The pressure before a storm weighs down upon my head, flattening scalp, wedging premonition into febrile brain. The storm itself will not shake free. It's not just the drama of stirring boughs and pelting rain. For Natalie's voice, as I sleep, advises writers to rein in their wild mind, even though it might rear and buck. Throughout the storm, I listen to her thunder and lightning tape. Now in morning sun, I plant snapdragons, zinnias. Sunflowers preside over the garden with stately crimson nods. Dimensions cross over like watercolors, bleeding but not muddy, merging separate realities. A commonality of closed connective tissue, striating web strands between blue spheres. Reclaim the land, reclaim the light, proclaim the oracle, declaim the light. Thank you.
I think you only read for 10 minutes. Not that I was watching the clock, but
Oh, well.
there you go. I guess I was. Tick-tock, ticking to death of time. Well, I lived here with my family in the old days in 1992 to 93 when I was writer in residence. And one thing I loved about London, and it was the strong sense of the artistic community here. I don't think I'd ever experienced that on the West Coast. And on the West Coast, people are very solitary. I don't have any writer friends except for Patrick Lane and Lorna Crozier, and that's because they're neighbors. Well, Al Purdy was too. So you tend to, the proximity throws you into a community. I guess that's the same anywhere. But London, I felt there was just, I don't know, it was pretty amazing, and I'm envious of that. And to be part of the community, on this visit, I decided I'd write a poem and enter it into something I can't pronounce, Words Fest Zine. It's hard to say, Words Fest Zine, but apparently it's Franken-zine, and the theme was Frankenstein, so I had to come up with a poem with Frankenstein in it. And so I wrote this the morning after I arrived, and I have to read it off my computer, which is very modern. Realize people probably read off their phones. I haven't gone that far yet. This is called Frankenstein Misses Her Deadline After Missing Her Plane to London. Missing has become my way. Finding yourself is harder when you don't know you are missing, so in that way I stay found. All the missing is within me, all the emptiness, yearnings, hollow places that can't be filled. It's as if missing itself had been hardwired into my life. Here's an aside for you. How do you tell a man to get lost in hard language? Spike O'Donnell of the O'Donnell Brothers of Chicago, the only small outfit to tell the Capone mob to go to hell and live, said this: be missing. I waited at departure gate D1 in Toronto, but Air Canada changed the gate on me without so much as a word. So I got word into it. Which is why I was late arriving in London, why I missed dinner, and why now I am an hour late submitting my poem to Wordfest Zine. Frankenstein Zine, jeez. I blame Air Canada, who thought my Halloween costume was the way things were. It's not only beautiful people who should be apprised of a gate change, surely. Who are we to judge? The critical woman at Air Canada's customer service didn't have to say anything. Her eyes said it all: be missing. I removed my mask so she could see I had been to hell and lived there. She rebooked me on the next plane out of there. So I got here. Thanks. Hasn't been edited yet, but that's the idea. An occasional poem, which I think is great to be able to, we all should be able to do that. Just come up with a poem for somebody's wedding or funeral. It's how poetry started really was for the occasion. So in my life, there have been three, I was thinking about the theme community, there have been three kinds of main community, I suppose, besides the writing community. One is the community of the street and people who are addicted. I've had 2 addicts in my family. I think we all probably have an addict in our family, I've found out since reading some of the poems I've written. The community of prison and the community of where I live, which is Haida Gwaii, so 2 hours north of Vancouver by plane and 8 hours out into the ocean. You can see Sarah Palin on a clear day. Seriously, you can. Well, Alaska anyway. And it's a wonderful community. No writers live there. You're known for your sourdough bread more than you are for anything else you do, except when I'm on the CBC, and then everybody kind of looks at me as if, who does she think she is? So it's that kind of community, small community, actually as big as the world. My youngest daughter, Sophie, was addicted and on the street for about 5 years. It's probably one of the hardest times in my life. But I did learn that there is a real community out there, that people looked out for her. And even the police did. I would get occasional calls from a Constable McLean in the Vice Squad in Kelowna, who hadn't seen Sophie for 2 weeks and was worried about her. And I thought, oh, well, I haven't heard from her either. We kept in very close contact. But, I guess people on the street said to her, you have family who love you? What are you doing out here? So, I imagine the street as, I've never been on the street. In the 60s, we were looked at. There's a sort of hippie world that looked after you when you were out there, but it's very different now. Anyway, I did write a series. The only thing I could do in the end was write a series of poems, because I always go back to poetry. It's sort of what saves my life. And I published a chapbook called The Goodness of This World, and this is one of the poems for my daughter. And she has a copy of this. I have shared them with her, so that, because people, you're not supposed to write about people's private lives without asking them now. I do. I said, well, I'm a writer. I steal from everybody. So, tell me your life story. It'll be in the next book. Just kidding. Not really. We were driving. I vowed to take you away from the life you were leading for good. The heroin you'd stashed for the journey ran out around Nanoose Bay, where we pulled in at a rest area so you could do your last fix in the privacy of the blue Portaloo. I got out of the car to wait and found in the dead grass at the edge of the parking lot a suitcase full of someone else's life. Recipes, spices whose expiry date had been and gone, a bottle of vanilla extract, the kind I let you sniff when we used to bake cookies together. Lately, you had taken to drinking the supersized containers I bought at Costco. You said it helped you sleep when the drugs ran out. I'd begun hiding it, and the knives I found in your bedroom under your pillow. I removed them without saying anything, so terrified had I become of your fate. In that parking lot, I unpacked cutlery, saucepans with lids missing, a single baby shoe. I worked loose the knot on a bundle of unopened letters with footprints all over them, then stopped as you came flailing back to me because someone had dumped a lifetime of family photographs in the outhouse toilet pit, and up until that point, it was the saddest thing I knew. We got in the car and drove, trying to imagine, had she been kicked out of her house or had she run away? Maybe she chucked everything before checking into the rehab facility on the hill, hoping to start anew. I didn't want to go on. I wanted to turn back, open the letters, find a clue, a name, an address to return the things to. But you said it was useless, and I could feel the panic rising in you, and I had little strength left at that time, and I was driving, and you need both hands to hold someone who is suffering and does not want to be held. It does have a happy ending. So my community on Haida Gwaii is this is a poem I wrote called Rest Area, No Loitering, and Other Signs of the Times. It was commissioned by CBC for the night of when the world was supposed to end. I think it was 1999? It's supposed to have ended so many times. December 31st, 1999. They had some dead air, so they asked writers to fill in the dead air periods. And so I thought about how when I go anywhere, I compulsively read signs. So it's a poem that has signs in it. Pick your rut carefully. You will be in it for the next 80 miles, warned a sign on a stretch of bad road near head-smashed-in Buffalo Jump, Alberta. I love my country, because even though we've been called the Vichyssoise of nations, cold, half French, and difficult to stir, we are honestly everything we pretend to be, one nation of 80 ethnic groups who still base our fashion taste on what doesn't itch. If the United States is like the guy at the party who gives everyone cocaine and still can't get anybody to like him, north of the 49th parallel, where all our Christmases are white, Canadians are the life of the party. God gave us memories so we could have roses in winter, they say in Manitoba. But on Vancouver Island, we know the cold of a Canadian winter can kill even a memory. Gather ye rosebuds was my old father's best advice. The average Canadian considers life too short to stuff a mushroom, thinks poutine is French cuisine, is too polite to take the last piece of Christmas cake from the plate, the last pierogi from the pot. The average Canadian says, I'm sorry 4.8 times a minute. We are a self-effacing nation, a well-mannered lot. Americans say no to drugs. Canadians say no thank you. We are not elitists, says our new Governor General. Ask anyone who matters. That, of course, was Adrian Clarkson. Political poetry has a way of dating. Canadians are unarmed Americans with health care. A sign on the door of the Ontario Legislature reads, warning to all personnel, firings will continue until morale improves. Red Fox says health nuts are going to feel stupid someday lying in hospital dying of nothing, but the unarmed in Canada will be covered. If I had my life to live over, I'd live over Haida Bucks in Masset on Haida Gwaii, order skim milk latte made from organic shade-grown beans only. Whenever I felt lonely, I'd drive down to Margaret's Cafe in Queen Charlotte City, where a sign immemorial says, tomorrow has been cancelled due to lack of interest. I'd order spaghetti to go. What person on this planet can feel lonely while eating spaghetti? My new philosophy for the millennium, dread one day at a time. Wake up on New Year's Day and smell what's left of the roses. Pick your rut carefully, but remember, better to be behind a police car than in front of one. When you die, there is going to be a big vacuum in your life, so make hay while the sun still shines through the ozone layer. Raise a glass to the future, taste the stars. Thank you. I had a taxi driver in Halifax. I was trying to explain where I lived, and he said, "Oh, so you live in an excluded sort of place?" And I said, "Yes, it's very excluded." Like that. And after the session on rivers yesterday, I live on a river called the Sangan River, which is a very clean river. You wouldn't find any pink teddy bears in it, I don't think, unless they jumped off the bridge by themselves. That's what they do up there. But one of my neighbors cut up a log for firewood and was condemned for the sawdust that the log created, because this could hurt the fish going up to spawn. So it's kind of how it is out in the West Coast. So I don't dare put a footprint on the riverbank, because I will disturb 15,000 invertebrates in that one footprint. I read that in The Golden Spruce by John Valiant. When we lived in London, my daughter Sophie went to a daycare here, and I can't remember the name of it, but Wendy Robson was her lovely teacher. I don't know if anybody here knows Wendy, if she's still around, but who did a little kind of book of photographs for Sophie. So this is a poem for my husband, Stephen Reid, who died in June, on June the 12th this year. And one of my jobs on Haida Gwaii is I'm a marriage commissioner, and I applied as a joke. One of my UBC students sent me the form that said, I read this. I thought, I could have fun with this form. And one of the questions what qualifies you for this position? And I put, married 3 times, third time lucky, he's been in prison our whole marriage. And I thought somebody at Vital Statistics would just laugh and throw this in the garbage, but I kept getting more interviews and finally got the job. And it is true, he did spend 14 years, Stephen, of our marriage in prison, which is probably what made the marriage work. I mean, I like a lot of time to myself, and so does he. But since he's died, I find that I miss him, and I'm reading lots of books on grief, and that's probably what I'll be writing about next. I thought I knew everything about grief. I've written about it all my life, and it's like I wrote children's books before I had children. I realized I knew very little, if in fact nothing. And anyway, by the daycare, there was this huge magnolia tree, probably the first one I'd ever noticed in my life. The poem is called Magnolia, and I wrote it for Stephen when he was in prison. Another Valentine's Day behind bars, and I bring you light from the stars that you might find your way back to us out of darkness. I bring you memories of me, naked, happy, 9 months pregnant, tasting applesauce in the kitchen. I bring you the wind, the way our house creaked as you rocked our newborn daughter who couldn't sleep. I bring a handful of rain that you may remember the sound of it, and the smell of the earth when you turn it in your hands. I don't know why our life took the turn it did, but now the smell of earth reminds me, the magnolia tree you planted the day our daughter was born. Did it live? I bring you tears, the ones you wept, mixed with the milky scent of those I kept locked up in me as we sang our daughter to sleep those first merciful years. If I could, I would give you wings to carry you up to the sky. When I kiss your eyes, your sudden cry startles the magnolia to a deeper white. And finally, this is a poem that I wrote. It shows that there's a happy ending to my daughter Sophie's story, because I don't like to leave people thinking she's still on the street. People do make it, I've discovered. So that's really good news, because you usually just hear the horror stories of those who don't, and see pictures of them, before crystal meth and after crystal meth. And they frighten you as a parent, as a human being, they frighten you. This is a poem called Determination. The night I found your ad on Craigslist, I had set a box of blueberries on the table to pick out the bruised ones, those that were past their prime. I took a break and looked you up online. I'd suspected you'd left the escort service where they'd given you a room, free meals, a counselor in case you needed one. I felt you were safe in that place, and you learned new skills, how to fold sheets, especially the bottom-fitted kind I'd always struggled with. Who needs Martha Stewart, you'd said, the needle marks on the back of your knees panicking me as you bent to demonstrate how the corners of the sheets tucked in. I could still see the baby girl in you. You sucked your thumb when you were doing it with the John, you told me later, one of your tricks. After you hit bottom, after rehab, you prayed, kneeling every night at the edge of your bed, hands clasped so fiercely I swore your knuckles bled. I didn't ask what you prayed for, only watched the sweet press of your lips like red grapes swollen with the summer sun. The ad had read, "Call me, I'm lots of fun." Each night as you prayed, I walked out into the dark, walked until my fears declined. Hard to calm the heart when it leaps so high. You need to hear your own footsteps in those moments, to trust you tread the ground. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Why don't we begin by talking about poetry always making trouble? And talk about that in terms of what that might mean for something like community.
My favorite quote of the moment. It's really art, but I'll stick to poetry. Poetry comforts the disturbed and disturbs the comfortable. Who said that? I don't know. It's on a postcard. It's probably a sign I looked at. Yeah, reading the signs.
Yeah. Well, Anselm Hollow said poetry has never been anything but trouble. Trouble's interesting. I mean, it's interesting in fiction. If you have a story where on a picnic and there are no ants in the picnic and no lightning storm, there's no story. And poetry really needs conflict too. I know my father grew up on the masters, read the classics, Keats, Shelley, and when I read those poems at high school when we were worried about the atom bomb, I didn't relate to Wordsworth either, wandering around looking at daffodils, which apparently he never saw. His sister pointed them out to him, and he went and locked himself in his study later while she cooked dinner. And he was always, his head was in a cloud, he never noticed things. I don't know. So
He wandered lonely as a cloud. No wonder.
So those poems didn't seem to have trouble in them for me, and so they didn't appeal. I like the juxtaposition of beautiful language and unbeautiful subject matter. And I think that upset my father. He wanted beautiful language and beautiful subject matter, which was a phase. That was how poetry was in the last century or century before. Now you need some friction and the interplay between, language that's gorgeous and then subject matter that's fraught with the daily life of this century. I think makes a more interesting read. That's how I look at it.
This was a loaded, planted question.
I know.
So I came up with one of my favorite poems, which I don't know by heart, In Memory of Yeats by W.H. Auden. You probably know it by heart.
You just came up with this now? How come it's printed out?
No. It was a planted question, and this morning at 6 a.m. I thought of it and printed it out because the question was already in our brains.
Oh, I didn't see the planted question.
You missed the email.
I'm at a disadvantage. I have a handicap here.
That was this is basically one question rolled over twice, right?
Yes.
But we did discuss it on Facebook. But
Facebook.
Oh, that.
That. Who goes there?
To quote W.H. Auden, "Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. Now Ireland has her madness and her weather still. For poetry," this is answering the second question, but I'm cheating. "For poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. Flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs. Raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives a way of happening, a mouth." I love that.
That was Auden?
Yeah, on Yeats' death, September 1st, 1939. Big year.
Auden wasn't a very community-minded person. I was at a writing conference. This is not, Bob Dylan told me never to name drop, but anyway, I was at a writing in Macedonia with amazing poets from all over the world, and Auden refused to stay with us. He wanted a better hotel, so I wrote him off at that point. So, not really.
Well, he likes Yeats, and he thought Yeats was community.
Yeats was okay. Yeats is part of the community.
Yeats is good.
What was the second question? I didn't even get that one either. So.
What do you think poetry making nothing happen means?
Well, I don't know that it's necessary for anything to happen. Why do we think something has to happen? Well, I just said it did, didn't I? In order to make fiction. So I'm kind of contradicting myself.
That's a poet.
Yes. I don't
That's
know.
what poets do.
Depends what you mean by happen. I don't think it makes wars happen. I hope it doesn't. I don't think it makes Trump go away. Nothing seems to, those things it doesn't make happen, but it makes something happen in our minds. I think it's very helpful to make you not feel so alone. And if one person is affected that way, then the poem has succeeded and has done some work, has made something happen. It doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be small.
Simple.
Yeah.
But real. And for me, a poem has to come from a certain source. It is not the intellect. It's not theory. It's not a concept. It's, I would say, the oracular or the Vatic. It's something that is coming from other, but realizing that we're all one. It's such a truism, but I think poetry has to get away from simile and metaphor and realize that in truth, when we use tropes like I am the branch of a tree, I am rooted here in London, which I am, that we forget the original perception that is truth. We are rooted here. We have more DNA. We have lots of DNA. Don't ask me any percentages, please. But with the tree or with mushrooms, then, well, that's not a compare. I don't want to compare, but we are the tree. We are the land. We are the river. It's not a simile or a metaphor. And I think when you realize that, then the poem that comes through us changes us, the poet. And if it's true enough, it's a translation from that realm of reality that will change you. And so things happen, change happens, one heart at a time.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's when, Degas and Mallarmé were friends, and Degas, turned to Mallarmé one day and said, oh, Stéphane, I want to write poems, and I've got all these ideas for poems, but they never seem to come. And Mallarmé looked at him kind of puzzled and said, my dear Degas, you don't make poetry with ideas, you make them with words.
He made them with colors. He made them with colors, didn't he? He saw.
That's
he was
really
a synesthete.
I've never been in that kind of esteemed company.
Yeah. But he was a synesthete, and I think most poets are, because I think there's a blurring. I'm interested in the blurring below the senses, where colors are felt in terms of sounds or smells or whatever. I'm really interested in that. And I think our esteemed academia has trained us to think from here up, without without reducing or letting go that boundary that we've been acculturated into. I think that's what troublemaking is.
I think that this has been off all the time.
No.
You're on. You're fine.
Talking to myself here. I like my life. I teach at UBC in the optional residency MFA program, and the students who are all amazing, they have PhDs in 3 other subjects, but they've been taught somewhere along the line that the metaphor is, if someone writes a poem about an egg, that it's metaphorical, and I say, I think it's about an egg. I'm very literal, and I edit literally, and I want something to work on a literal level, and I write that way too. If there's a deeper meaning, if I start being aware of it, conscious of it, I get so self-conscious that I give up on the poem. I think, okay, I see what I'm doing here, this is not good. So I want there to be that mystery, that magic on that other level, but I don't, if you approach it with your consciousness, a consciously engaged mind can't write poetry, I tell my students. I just discovered something about jigsaw puzzles the other night. A friend came from California and she wanted to do a jigsaw puzzle, but she said, we can talk as we do this puzzle. And I realized the part of your brain that starts working on a jigsaw puzzle is kind of where you go when you write a poem. It's not quite there. You're not quite conscious. You're existing on another place. It was very similar. And I did one with my mother, who's 92 and had a stroke about 6 years ago, so her speech is affected. But we could sit and do the puzzle, and I could suddenly understand her. And it was, so I'm really big on jigsaw puzzles. I used to think, what a waste of time. I work in a thrift shop and people donate them, and I work with a woman who counts every piece in the box to make sure they're all there. Well, how does she know someone hasn't mixed two jigsaw puzzles together? So anyway, I really like that fact that my mind felt quite calm in that, going into that, what did Yeats call it? Some sort of, it's like being a medium for a poem. And that's doing a jigsaw puzzle, you go to the same place. At least that one night I did. So
you distract your conscious mind.
That's right. Yeah.
It's all about distraction.
Distracting it.
Distraction in a good way, not a Facebook way.
He could write poetry because he was thinking of ideas which are you think about consciously as opposed to letting that conscious mind go. A conscious mind is a good thing when you have to cross the street. You don't want to be. I mean, that's why poets get run over.
And
all
when
the time.
you're editing.
Because you got to engage your conscious mind if you're doing something practical in life. Driving a car would be one of them. Although driving is a good place to get ideas too. Walking, you're doing something else.
The rhythm.
Yeah, the rhythm. Yeah.
But editing, it's good to have a conscious mind when
Yes.
you're editing.
Oh, yes. And rewriting too. Yeah. We agree on that. Good.
So is there I'm teaching a poetry class right now, and one of the things, some of them are already aware that, yes, there is some other process. It isn't about, I've got my metaphor, oh boy, wait for that poem to come. But rather, they think of it as, it's trying to get them to be able to talk about poetry in such a way that they don't start imputing that kind of intention to poets, that, well, with a soupçon of symbolism and a dash of metaphor.
Where does this come from? Does it come from?
I don't know.
Yeah, I know.
I swear to God, I've never had a university, course in which any professor has ever said, that's how X constructed this poem.
You're just not old enough. At Medway High School, Alice Oswald taught us how to analyze a poem by grammar.
Well, there's a difference between analyzing and simply, saying, in a sense, doing a form of verse vivisection, whereby, one is, pretending that, this metaphor is somehow the engine of a poem, when in fact it's maybe an utter accident.
Well,
right?
vivisection implies a dead body of a poem.
Or you're cutting it open
killing
alive.
it open, yeah.
We had to count the metaphors and similes in Earl Burney's David, and that was the first Canadian poem I ever read at school. And I got 32 metaphors, so I won. But,
I thought you were saying you got 32 out of 100.
oh, no, they found 32 metaphors and similes, I think. I remember that, because that seemed like a lot for a poem. It's a long poem. But another thing is that metaphor had a place in the 16th century. If you wrote a political poem or something like Gulliver's Travels and you didn't disguise it somehow, you could have been killed, put to death. But now in Canada, you can pretty well write whatever you want and not be put to death so far. Certainly
That's more allegory or rhetoric.
Yes, I know, but still the same thing. And so you don't now have to disguise your feelings. Since I had a woman at Waterloo, I remember she kept writing poems about a river. And the river one day would be dry and the next day would be overflowing its banks. And I finally said, this isn't really about a river, is it? It's about something else. She said, it's my marriage. I said, oh, well, how am I supposed to know that? Until you, why don't you write about your marriage then? She said, that would be too painful. I said, well, now we're getting somewhere. That's where you have to go. Poetry can be painful if it's doing its job, because other people, you want it to be cathartic. You want other people to hear it and not want to go and slash their wrists, but to say, oh yes, I've been there too, or I know someone else. Or you want to connect to the human community, not alienate them, I hope.
I think that Josh standing there is a signal of, nope, we're on still?
We're fine.
I'm not watching the clock like
I am.
can't see it, I don't know
Oh,
that.
I have clock.
Would we like to open the floor to
yeah, sure.
questions? Yes.
This is for Susan Musgrave. I was thinking that when you're
Live without,
Well, maintain a relationship like that at a distance.
well, you don't have email in prison, but we had letters, yeah.
You still had
Yeah, we had letters.
style of communication.
Yes, we did, you're right. I think that's what first drew me to him, was he'd written a manuscript that was given to me at Waterloo when I was writer in residence, and it was the first, I mean, I'd read lots of manuscripts, but I sent it to McClellan Stewart, who offered him a contract the next day. It was just a very exciting time, because I thought someone can be saved. I don't know, I'm always trying to save people, and I forget about trying to save myself. But now that he's dead, I have to try and save myself. That's been the hardest part. Like, I have nobody else to work on. I've ignored myself for 35 years, more or less, except I haven't. I've gone on writing. But yes, so the literary connection was very strong. I loved his writing. And that's what we lived through letters. That was our relationship for the first 2 years. And they're all at McMaster's now, sequestered for 100 years. I don't know why. So that's what you're supposed to do with personal things.
Yes?
Who have you been reading lately?
I've been in BC for the last month, so I've been reading all the writers I've met, because we trade books. And so I've been reading Daphne Marlett, who has a 600-page tome out from Talon Books. I've been reading Sharon Thiessen, who I stayed with in Thiessen in Kelowna. I've been reading, and new writers as well, like Carrie from Kelowna. Yeah, you've got to go and read Carrie.
I mostly
Gilbert,
read
that's it.
Irish novels. I just finished Neil Williams' History of the Rain, which is a wonderful title, like Snow Falling on Cedars, another title I like. That's the novel I finished, and fabulous.
Yes?
You commented, Susan, at saying right at the literal level. Could you comment on this situation? Often I'm writing at the literal level, but while I'm actually writing, then symbolically will come up right away. So would you suggest in that case to continue with symbolic, or to just push that aside and stay at the literal level?
Did everybody hear that? Yeah. I wouldn't want to suggest anything to anybody else. For me, I did write a poem years ago called After the Battle, and when I used to watch cowboy and Indian shows when I was a kid, that's what was on, I'd always think I would play dead if I was in that situation. I'd pull somebody over the top of me and then I wouldn't get shot. So I wrote a poem, was unaware that anything was wrong. I crawled out from under you after the battle, blah, blah, blah. And I heard it discussed in a university workshop, and it was a poem about a couple making love. And I was horrified. I thought, no, it was Custer's last stand. I was there. In my mind, it was totally literal. I wasn't. And so had I become aware in that poem that I was writing about people making love, I would have become so self-conscious that for me, I think I would have gone in another direction. So I don't know for you that just trust. I think you've got to trust yourself as a writer. Trust your voice. Trust what you're doing. Tom Robbins says that whatever you get criticized for doing when you're a young writer, keep doing it, because that's probably what you do best. So if the awareness sort of makes you feel uncomfortable, that's usually a sign that, maybe something isn't working. And I don't know how you'd stop being symbolic. I don't know how you turn off the symbolism.
But it ends up directing the writing, and that's what yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But paper is cheap. If you're a painter, you can spoil.
Not really cheap. It comes from trees, you know.
Yeah, I know, but relative to canvas.
We don't cut down.
Relative to canvas, it's
But paper grows on trees.
beautiful trees who are us, right? But what I'm saying is that painting, if you go into symbolism or something, you've wrecked it. But with paper, you can do two streams. You can do both, and then in your editing phase, you can go back and see what works.
Yeah, and let it sit for a while, and then read. A week goes by, and you go, oh no, I shouldn't have done. This is the one. So time sometimes is really helpful there.
And get it all out on paper.
Yes?
I think in one of the lines of the poem you use the word naturalized in terms of dreaming, and you also talk about consciousness and subconsciousness. And I thought the first question would be naturalization, where it comes to also symbolism and all those kinds of editing tips. How would that apply to the process of creativity? And on the second question,
I agree, it's all one flow, and then afterwards you can see what you're doing. In terms of naturalization, I've come back to London to live in my mother's manicured lawn. Well, actually, there's a house on the lawn. I was going to say,
Do you have a tent,
I'm not
please?
the earthworm, but it is now not a manicured lawn. It is a wonderful, would you not agree, my friends, wilderness of forests and all sorts of naturalized trees. So the book that I was reading from, Fox Haunts, is really a book on rewilding, which is really interesting to me to approach the beasts like coyotes who are not natural to us. The eastern coyote has just come from the west, or the cougars that were shot on the Thames a couple of years ago, you know, not on the Thames, off by the side. But that interest is in incorporating the rewilding and letting those creatures be in. I mean, I have joke poems in the book about how to repel the urban fox. And actually, I'm now writing about how to repel the urbane fox, but that's a different story.
And I think rewilding is part of what the creative process is. And Susan also wouldn't mind speaking to that, because and that naturalization, so that we can get to a place where we're really bringing up an essence of something.
Well, Susan talked about what you were doing as a child is the natural direction. And I so agree with that. Like, I have an ability to remember what it was like to be 3 or 4. And the acculturation that happens after that, I try to let myself be free of that and go back to the basic perception. That is what interests me.
Do you have a question?
Hi, this is for Susan. I appreciate so much the way you lay yourself bare and you expose such vulnerability. I mean, we can all relate to trauma, but probably not to that extreme. How do you let yourself go out there and expose that vulnerability?
By hiding really well the things that I'm really vulnerable about. I discovered that when I had an interviewer once. It was Iona Campanola, and she asked me a question that just stopped me. It was about my mother, and I realized, boy, I'm like that bird which pretends it has a broken wing to lead everyone away from the nest. It's not that the poems aren't genuine, they are. But with hurt and grief, it's all, actually I haven't written any poem since Stephen died, except for the Frankenstein one. But I'm writing a memoir, so I'm putting a lot of poetry into that. I don't know, it seems to me that when I read those poems about addiction, I get people coming to me afterwards who talk about their son, nephew, husband, father, and their stories are worse than mine. One woman came in Seashell. She said her son sends her vials of his blood from London, England, to say, because I guess she said there's nothing left of you, and he's to prove that there's something left of him. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like my family, we were always loved each other. There was love and closeness. There was pain and trauma, but I guess you just learn to live with trauma, but then it takes a toll. Like lately, I've had to start taking natural remedies because my adrenal glands were so out of whack from 35 years of trauma. And so if I looked at myself in the mirror, I'd shriek because I thought it was something coming at me. So I wasn't as healthy as I might appear. I'm working on it. And I didn't know that I'd become so, you become used to living with a certain level of stress that if it's taken away, it's like, now what? So I'm not sure that's a good thing, but it's all a process. And certainly writing has helped. It's the one place I can go where I can make sense of things in a strange way. But I do know that we all, I could probably talk to each one of you in this room and you would tell me a story about which I wouldn't use. But that your stories, would there be story of we all suffer because of family. And what is the line? A family, a walled city that contains all the joy and pain a body could want. And yeah.
All right, I think we've come to the end of our time, so please join me in thanking them one last time.